Well, as it turns out, shit has gotten way out of control this past 2020 year. With all the rampant illnesses, pandemonium, and excessive takeout orders clogging our arteries, I suppose we ought to face the man in the mirror within and sort out all these ridiculous shortcomings that plague our environment and fuel our mental problems. And what better way to do that than with the help of anime? Just leave it to Japanese cartoons to tell us just how wrong we are for living our lives the way we've been. Maiden Arjuna has some interesting perspectives and information that depict just how unnecessary the automation that we instill into the structure of our societies is. After getting in an accident while riding on the back of her boyfriend's motorcycle, Juna finds herself floating outside of her body in an operating room, watching as the doctors try to save her life. Gotta say, I do like the stoned fever dream-like aesthetic that the out-of-body experience is shown as. It's abstract, but is still based in the real world in an interesting way. For example, I like how she could see on the other side of the wall to see her boyfriend crying, and then get sucked through the ceiling all the way into space. She then sees energy worms engulf the Earth, and then all of a sudden gets some proposal by a strange voice asking her to help him in protecting the Earth from these energy worms called Raja. The magical space boy says that Raja comes from the injured Earth and will bring about the end, so they must be purged. He also says that life on the planet is going to face extinction, so Juna must help fight them with the help of Space Boy's guidance. And of course, in return, he will revive her. After accepting the mysterious Space Boy's offer, his spirit leads her to a helicopter, where he is, IRL. And as it turns out, he sacrificed his health in order to do this, and now this lowly girl has to push him around. They telepathically tell her about this holy stone that she must stick on her forehead so that she could access her avatar powers. They then decide to drop Juna off at a nuclear reactor in order to awaken her abilities. Then the space boy helps guide her boyfriend to the same nuclear reactor. After some explosion goes off, caused by the Raja affecting the reactor, Juna's boyfriend falls off a ledge, and then she has to go Super Saiyan in order to save him. A reoccurring thing that happens in the show is that Juna attacks the Raja but mistakenly goes about the situation wrong, as the Raja represents pollution of some kind. In this instance, she blindly shot her arrows, which could have damaged the reactor, and she accidentally summoned a mecha-like monstrosity, not knowing how to use her powers. Doing this also caused further damage. At one point, she tried to shoot at a helicopter that had a Raja on it, but that was only because it was causing pollution. Like I said before, the Raja are basically a symbol for pollution. At school, the teacher's mouth and all the textbooks had a Raja on them because of the troubling nature of the school system. She then tries to shoot the entire school during a panic attack because she saw the whole school as a Raja, but was stopped by a space boy because obviously that's not the answer to the problem. Now, one issue I do have with the show, I don't know why the space kid can just explain to Juna a bit more as to what was going on and not to attack things, but whatever. I get that she needs to see these things for herself, but I don't know, he could have explained a bit more. Like, okay, you're seeing Raja now, don't attack them because, it'll injure something. Anywho, after her first encounter on the power plant, she's then sent to the wilderness in order to cleanse her body and essentially learn the truth about nature and how the filth of society has blinded her. After a while of stumbling around, she gains her natural survival instincts that were kind of stripped away from her by living in modern society. She eventually is able to feed herself because she is able to use her instincts to find which food is right to eat. In this process of listening to her own instincts in nature, we are visually shown in a very metaphorical way essentially how all is one. Because of living in society, she relied too much on easy living. The polluting ways of humans have messed up the natural connection that all living things have with each other and the environment. After Juna's boyfriend gets a little sad and mopey, he decides to go back there and meet up with her. After more Raja hilarity ensues, the two meet an old man who brings them to his garden. Over the course of the time they spend with the old man, they discuss how many facets of an ecosystem are capable of tending to itself. At one point, the boyfriend flicks a worm that was on one of the cabbages. The old man asks, "Why do you kill?" Which is exactly what Space Boy said to Juna earlier when she shot up the polluted junkyard with her bow. The two are confronted with the question of why do bugs eat the vegetables. They then discover that bugs only eat the dark part of the leaf, which is the bad part of the leaf. Later, as crack-riddled Juna sees everyone's image in the food, she then starts realizing that since all this food will become them and will be absorbed by them, then that means that the garden represents their future. And because of all the insects, the garden needs no tilling or fertilizer. As the bugs eat shit, die, and spread around nutrients, they naturally tend to the land. After a while, a plane sprays some pesticides or something and kills all of the insects in the process just for a short-term efficiency, and in order to keep good appearance and to kill the bugs that are eating the produce. In all actuality, the garden doesn't need this at all. In fact, you could probably say that doing things like this obviously has a very negative impact on the environment because of all the death that is being created. Complications of other kinds could also arise with ecosystems and natural building blocks being artificially manipulated. However, mankind is too busy with their lives to focus on the important aspects of the environment, so they want to make everything easier and use processed methods in order to be the most efficient. This is something that the show points out that society does all the time with everything. This message, I feel, is also shown again in a different way in the next episode. Because Juna is now in such a woke state of mind, she now has a hard time enjoying fast food because she now understands it's all a bunch of processed, gory pieces of shit garbage that was made very unnaturally. After a micro Raja gets into their intestines, it was also shown to us again that Juna can't just run and gun and shoot everything. Because in this episode, as her spirit travels inside her boyfriend's stomach to, get rid of the Raja, this is a Osmosis Jones episode, she starts to accidentally spread the Raja more as she's fighting it. And since her boyfriend doesn't have any of the necessary good bacteria that is used to fight off infections, his immune system can't fight off the bad Raja. Space Boy reminds Juna, just like earlier, that the stomach is kind of like the land, everything is connected and has a role to play. It is then that Juna goes Super Saiyan and begins shooting magic out of her fingertips in order to grow the beneficial bacteria in order to replace the Raja. With the garden, the ecosystem took care of itself and essentially worked as a whole in order to sustain itself. The stomach is very similar. Affecting one thing could lead to another. Society, on the other hand, I guess you could say doesn't work as efficiently with how its moving parts work together and tend to itself. The show discussed later on an episode about a teacher how in society everything is generally done in a certain way so that everything can be furthered along in the best way possible, or what is considered the ideal, instead of what is right for all the facets of society. Just like with the stomach and the garden, everything is connected and one thing affects another. There are a lot of structures in society that may not work for a lot of people, and that could be because of the rigidness of what is supposed to be ideal. People of different types get left out, and as technology gets more advanced, people desire unnatural things and want convenience, which can affect the way society functions and can essentially make the whole organism not work properly because of miscommunication. After tripping out in the middle of class, Lane style, Juna starts to see a Raja coming out of everyone's mouth and in the textbooks. Juna then asks the teacher if she can hear his true voice, since she can't hear his or anyone else's around her. After ditching class and panicking, Juna and her boyfriend then later see their teacher and decide to stalk him for some reason. She asks again, pretentiously, the same question, and he invites her in. The teacher then goes over a series of questions about aspects of society and how it deals with managing different things. Juna's answer is always the same, because it's easier. Juna then has a flashback to her dad when she asks him if he's happier now that he left their mom. The dad responds with, to make things easier and to be happy were two different things. Society wants to make things go by smoother, but that doesn't always mean that is what's best. The teacher then went on to talk more about what he wanted his students to understand about math. It ended up confusing me and Juna. But from what I interpreted, however, in his example of the great mathematician that died before his theorem was proven, the reason why it got finished was because others saw the beauty in it and put their own resources into finishing it. If not for that big effort put in from all those scientists from all those decades, it wouldn't have gotten done. All of that research worked together as a whole to prove that the theorem was true. After Juna gets confused about the rest of what he was saying, he then finishes with saying how true learning has to touch you and is all about how everyone has to come to some kind of common understanding. And of course at the end of the episode, Juna adds, if one of us changes, we all change. I could be interpreting this wrong, but I feel like the show is just trying to say that if we could somehow work together and communicate properly as a whole, then of course, things can get done properly and more efficiently. The curriculum in the school system doesn't work for everyone, and even though we try to teach kids of the same ages, different kids end up needing different things and requiring different things for their learning. There are sections of society that are left out and don't get the stuff it needs to grow and prosper. We want to make things easier and smoother, but of course it shouldn't be at the cost of what we need. By talking to the teacher, Juna is able to hear his true voice that was being, of course muffled by the curriculum. He wasn't being censored, or if you will, he was able to speak his mind, I guess. Not to get into too much, after a bit, Juna gets suspicious of her boyfriend losing interest and maybe even cheating. While strolling around, she runs into the lolly girl, and let's say shit goes anime pretty fast. The lolly girl starts to console Juna about her boyfriend trouble, and as it turns out, somehow this little girl knows a lot about sex and begins to tell a story about how she remembers being inside her mother's stomach. She then explains how she has the ability to feel something that happens before it happens, whatever the hell that means, as well as the ability to feel and control other people's emotions and thoughts. So basic telepathic abilities plus, some emotional specific ones, I guess. But, then there's the added attack that I just mentioned of she can, I guess, somehow feel things before it happens, whatever that means. So I guess even as an unborn infant, she could feel everything her mother did, I guess. And as it turns out, her mother fucked a bunch of guys and paid off debts with her body. I feel like these past few episodes have also generally been trying to say how communication and words can be a trap, kind of, I guess, and you know, in general, words can make it harder for us to express ourselves because we can't always perfectly depict what we feel, and words may, you know, confine us too much or whatever. In the teacher episode, we learn how, you know, in general, society does a lot of things because automation is easier. Juna and her boyfriend have been struggling with communication, mainly because, you know, saving face and, you know, just beating around the bush, you know, because they just want to do what's easier instead of talking and working through it. You know, with the case of the lowly girl, she explains how she couldn't grow up normal because of her past experiences. Because her mother wasn't listening to her, you know, what her telepathic child wanted or needed, you know, or gave a shit about anything that she was feeling, you know, which turns out somehow the mother knew but didn't care. You know, now of course the lowly girl has to deal with the trauma. As Juna listens, she realizes she can hear babies calling out from the hospital that's right next to them. Over the course of their conversation, they talk about how, you know, the way babies are taken care of is kind of uncaring mainly because society wants everything to essentially be on a conveyor belt. They mention how babies don't normally cry when they're secure and only let out a gasp. I mean, you know, just to add in my own experience, when my little brother was born, you know, he didn't really cry until the doctors made him. Yeah, in most cases, you know, babies don't normally cry if they're born the right way, but, you know, that's not always true. You know, sometimes they just do, and whatever. You know, the show just talks about how, you know, in hospitals, when they are pulled out under bright lights and are not with their mothers right away, you know, it can make them cry more, I guess. The lowly girl also states that if it weren't for hospitals, a lot of babies wouldn't be born either. Just because there are issues that arise with making everything in a natural conveyor belt like process, that doesn't mean that society is 100% wrong for doing things this way. Things can't always bend backwards for every human being, or every aspect of society. It would be almost impossible as, you know, humans, because humans actually had to create these structures in order to survive and further society, and they're actually necessary, even though they don't work for all. Just like with the Raja inside of Juna's boyfriend's stomach, the problem can't just be shot away willy-nilly without having, you know, consequences. These things must be replaced and updated accordingly. You know, just because something doesn't work in society, that doesn't mean you just remove it. Oh, the school system doesn't work, let's remove it. Oh, hospitals aren't the best for babies, you know, people, so let's remove it. No, that doesn't work. You know, it's just, there are things that could be updated and fixed to work better for all people, I guess. Earlier on in the episode, Juna hears, you know, the baby within her sister's stomach and tells her what it's thinking as she's smoking. They later meet back up, and, you know, Juna tries to scold her sister on the whole abortion thing, saying how it's immoral. But as it was explained to her, you know, by her sister, is it even right raising a kid with somebody that, you know, she doesn't even love? Again, implying the message of, you know, what exactly the right thing is. You know, what is the right thing to do? You could maybe say somehow that this abortion is immoral because it destroys a life, maybe. But creating a child in a loveless, careless environment where they, you know, will not be properly taken care of, you could also say is, you know, also unjust. You know, I don't know. I guess, you know, now it's time for me to insert my own personal beliefs. I'm massively pro-abortion. You know, anybody who is anti-abortion is just, you know, retarded. You know, it's just ridiculous. And, you know, I'll just give this brief abortion defense. You know, if you put a seed in the ground and you water a seed, and then some stems poke out, and then you take the seed out of the ground, did you kill a tree? No, you just killed a seed. You stopped a seed from growing. You didn't kill a tree, you know. Same thing with a human, you know, just because, you know, it develops a little bit, that doesn't mean it has a soul or has developed enough of a consciousness, you know, of course, you know, before 6 months, of course, you know, blah, 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 you know, that should always be acceptable. You know, and of course, Juna then fucks her boyfriend on the beach and, you know, fixes their issues. And I gotta say, it was pretty fucking hilarious how her boyfriend fucking was just crying because he fucking nutted too fast. So fucking ridiculous. So hilarious. It was just so soy and beta and just hilarious. Gotta be honest, I really did not give a shit about the ending of the show. It seemed like the entirety of Japan was just getting destroyed, and, you know, Juna's boyfriend was struggling to survive or whatever. Juna was also seemingly in the midst of trying to figure out how to save Japan. I just could not care for... I just couldn't care for it all for some reason. Maybe it's because I didn't really care about a lot of the characters that were still in Japan. I just felt like stuff was just happening, and I have gotta say the ending was just kind of ridiculous. After Spaceboy reveals that he absorbed all of the Raja, Juna then somehow uses her powers to turn all the Raja into food for the insects, and, you know, all that will be absorbed back into the environment. It sort of seems like Juna is just able to use random magical abilities, despite seemingly not understanding what to do, or how to use her powers. Heck, how does she even know how to use some of these magical powers? You know, like again when she was in her boyfriend's stomach and she shot the magic out of her fingertips in order to turn bad bacteria into good bacteria. Also, I don't really like how vague, the Space Boy was with telling Juna what she needs to do. I understand that the classic, the student must figure it out on their own, and go down their own path and learn shit on their own, but come on. Why couldn't Space Boy just say, hey dumbass, use your powers to get rid of the cause of the Raja, instead of just blindly attacking, which also could damage other living organisms? I can understand to an extent why Juna should come to the conclusion in her own way how to deal with the Raja, but Space Boy could have been more informative and helpful instead of just being a wise ass. The boyfriend character served his purpose well enough, however, Juna carried the relationship for me. If it wasn't for Juna, I wouldn't have cared at all about this character. Overall, I would give the show a strong 6, maybe light 7 out of 10. Lovely show, I guess. Just sort of drags on a bit later on. Well, I don't want to promise too much, but look out for a new piece of content every week. Some of these videos may range from movies, TV shows, and maybe I'll get into some games, so who knows. Keep an eye out.